High Commander Vexthor of the Darthaxi Research Fleet maintained perfect stillness as his vessel's sensors analyzed the derelict human ship floating in the void. The massive colony vessel showed signs of devastating damage. Multiple hull breaches, failing life support, and critical system failures across all decks. By any reasonable assessment, the ship and its crew should have been dead in space. Yet the sensors told a different story. "Impossible," muttered Chief Researcher Xylax, her crystalline appendages trembling as she studied the readings. "We're detecting movement throughout the vessel. The humans are still working." Vexthor's secondary eyes narrowed. In his 3 centuries of xenological research, he had never encountered anything like this. The humans should have evacuated hours ago, when their primary reactor first began to fail. Instead, they remained aboard, fighting against what his calculations indicated was certain death. "Open a communication channel," he ordered, curiosity overriding standard non-interference protocols. The bridge crew quickly complied. A moment later, a human appeared on the main view screen. Despite visible injuries and what appeared to be severe environmental suit damage, Captain Sarah Chen's voice was steady and clear. "This is the Earth Colony Vessel Horizon. We appreciate your concern, but we have the situation under control." Vexthor's translator must have malfunctioned. The situation was manifestly not under control. "Captain, our scans indicate catastrophic damage to multiple critical systems. We can offer immediate evacuation assistance." The human captain actually smiled, a disturbing expression given the circumstances. "Thank you, but that won't be necessary. We've managed to stabilize the reactor core using some creative solutions. My engineering team is implementing repairs as we speak." "Creative solutions?" Xylax interjected, her scientific curiosity piqued. "Your reactor containment field is operating at 12% efficiency. The laws of physics dictate." "The laws of physics," Captain Chen interrupted, "are more like guidelines when human ingenuity is involved. Would you like to observe? We could use an extra set of eyes on our sensor readings while we complete the repairs." Before Vexthor could object to this clear violation of standard procedures, Xylax had already agreed. And so began the Darthaxi's first real lesson about humanity. Over the next 26 hours, the alien researchers watched in fascination as the human crew defied death through sheer stubborn determination. They had indeed stabilized their reactor by jury-rigging the containment field using modified shield generators and what appeared to be repurposed food preservation units. When one solution failed, they immediately began working on 3 more. "They don't stop," Xylax whispered during the 20th hour. "They don't even consider stopping. Look at their neural patterns. Failure doesn't demoralize them. It makes them more focused." The humans worked in shifts, treating injuries without pausing their repairs, sharing oxygen when environmental systems failed in certain sections. They collaborated with an efficiency that bordered on hive mind behavior. Yet each individual showed remarkable adaptability and creative problem-solving. When the reactor finally stabilized, Vexthor expected the humans to rest. Instead, they immediately began improving their temporary solutions and documenting their innovations for future use. "You seem surprised by our persistence," Captain Chen noted during their final communication. Her environment suit was now held together largely by emergency patches, but her eyes were bright with triumph. "Would your people have handled it differently?" "We would have evacuated at the first sign of reactor instability," Vexthor admitted. "The risk assessment would have demanded it." "Ah," Chen nodded. "That's the difference then. When humans do risk assessment, we don't just calculate the chances of success. We calculate the cost of failure. This ship carries 10,000 colonists in cryosleep. Evacuating meant abandoning them. So failure wasn't an option." After the Horizon continued on its journey, Vexthor spent 3 days composing his report to the Darthaxi High Council. How could he explain that they had encountered a species that simply refused to accept defeat, a species that treated the impossible as a personal challenge? Include my preliminary psychological analysis, Silac suggested, reviewing his draft. The humans don't just survive against impossible odds. They learn from the experience. They treat every near-death encounter as a training opportunity. It's terrifying if you think about it too much. Vexthor did think about it. He thought about it as reports began coming in from other research vessels encountering human ships. Each story followed a similar pattern. Humans facing certain death, humans refusing to accept it, humans emerging stronger than before. The final line of his report would be quoted in Darthaxi academic circles for centuries to come. In their language, they have a saying, "Where there's a will, there's a way." We are only beginning to understand that for humans, this is not an inspirational phrase. It is a fundamental law of their universe, one they will bend all other laws to enforce. The High Council dismissed his warnings as exaggeration. After all, how dangerous could a single species be, no matter how stubborn? They would learn their mistakes soon enough. But by then, humanity would be ready to teach the galaxy an even bigger lesson about the true meaning of determination. The Grand Assembly of the Galactic Concordat buzzed with agitation as Supreme Strategist Key Varn presented his findings. The massive chamber, designed to accommodate representatives of 300 species, had never felt so tense. The human expansion must be contained, Key Varn declared, his luminescent skin pulsing with emphasis. They have established 17 colonies in the past solar cycle alone. Their rate of territorial growth exceeds all historical precedents. The assembled representatives shifted uncomfortably. They had all read the reports about these humans, reports that seemed too fantastic to be true. Ships that refused to die. Colonies surviving on worlds deemed uninhabitable. Technologies cobbled together from impossible combinations of components, yet somehow functioning. We have already positioned our defense fleets, Key Varn continued, projecting a tactical display. The humans will be restricted to their current territory. Any attempt to expand further will be met with overwhelming force. From her observation pod, senior anthropologist Miratel felt her throat sacs constrict with worry. Supreme Strategist, she called out, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years studying human behavior patterns. I must advise against this course of action. Your concern is noted, Key Varn dismissed, but the mathematics are clear. Our combined fleet outnumbers their ships 100 to 1. Our technology is centuries ahead of theirs. They cannot possibly. Numbers mean nothing to them, Miratel interrupted, breaking protocol in her urgency. You're thinking like a rational species. Humans don't operate on rationality when they're challenged. They operate on something far more dangerous, spite. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Spite was not a concept most species used in strategic planning. Before Miratel could elaborate, the chamber's emergency channels activated. The tactical display shifted, showing a human diplomatic vessel approaching the Concordat's blockade line. They're hailing us, the communication officer announced. The face that appeared on the main screen belonged to Ambassador Marcus Jung, a deceptively mild-looking human with gray-streaked hair. Greetings, representatives of the Concordat. I see you've arranged quite a welcome party for us. Favarn moved to the foreground. This is not a welcome, Ambassador. This is a boundary. Your species' expansion ends here. Jean's expression didn't change, but Miratel noticed a subtle shift in his posture. She had seen this in her research, the moment when humans went from diplomatic to dangerous. Interesting perspective, Jean replied. We see it differently. Those worlds you're blocking. They have people who asked for our help. Colonies suffering from resource shortages. Stations with failing life support. We made promises to them. Their problems are not your concern, Key Varn stated firmly. Return to your territory. Jung smiled. Miratel felt her scales ripple in alarm. She had documented that smile in her research files. The humans called it the "Oh, you poor fool" expression. Let me be clear, Jung said softly. We're going to help those people. The only choice you get to make is whether you want to be remembered as the ones who helped us help them, or the ones who tried to stop us and failed. Kavarn's luminescence flared with anger. You dare threaten the combined might of the Concordat? We have you outnumbered 100-1. Ah, John nodded. So you've chosen to be remembered as the fools. Very well. Let me share something about humans that you seem to have missed in your calculations. We don't fight harder when we're fighting for ourselves. We fight harder when we're fighting for others. The transmission cut off. For a moment, the chamber was silent. Then the reports started coming in. The human ships weren't attacking the blockade. They were simply ignoring it. They slipped through gaps that shouldn't have existed, used maneuvers that violated normal space combat doctrine, and in some cases seemed to dare the Concordat ships to fire first. They're dispersing our formation without firing a shot, one fleet commander reported, bewildered. Every time we adjust to block them, they're already 3 moves ahead. As if they planned for us to plan for them, Miratel finished. They're using our own tactical superiority against us. The more we try to predict their movements using advanced algorithms, the more they benefit from our predictability. Within hours, human ships had broken through to every colony that had requested aid. The Concordat fleet, designed to fight conventional battles against conventional enemies, found itself tangled in its own carefully planned response protocols. But the real shock came after the humans reached their objectives. Instead of pressing their advantage, they simply began their aid operations. They delivered supplies, repaired life support systems, and established sustainable infrastructure, all while the Concordat fleet watched, trapped in a tactical nightmare of their own making. Don't you see? Miratel addressed the stunned assembly. They never intended to fight us. They just needed us to believe they would. They turned our own fear of their capabilities into a weapon. Kavarn, his luminescence now dim with humiliation, finally asked the question that would reshape Concordat policy. How do we defend against a species that treats our defenses as puzzles to be solved? The answer came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Zhang had reopened the communication channel. Behind him, humans efficiently coordinated aid efforts across multiple worlds. Here's a radical suggestion, he offered, still wearing that mild expression. Stop trying to defend against us. Help us instead. You have resources and technology. We have determination and creativity. Together, we could solve problems you haven't even tried to tackle because you calculated they were impossible. Miratel watched understanding dawn across the assembly. The humans hadn't broken through the blockade to prove they could fight. They'd done it to prove they could help. And in doing so, they demonstrated something far more important. The galaxy's strongest species wasn't the one with the biggest fleet or the most advanced technology. It was the one that simply refused to accept that anything was impossible when people needed help. Deep within the crystalline spires of the Nexus Intelligence Center, War Processor Xin reviewed the data streams with growing frustration. The Sildaxi Dominion had spent decades studying human psychology, searching for the perfect way to break their spirit. They had found none. Show me the Epsilon scenario again, Hexine commanded. The holographic display flickered, revealing footage from their most ambitious attempt yet. The Dominion had engineered what should have been the perfect trap. They had positioned a seemingly vulnerable colony near human space, populated it with civilian refugees, then rigged the entire system with quantum destabilizers. When the humans inevitably came to help, they would be caught in a cascading wave of spatial distortions. Their ships would be trapped, their technology would fail, and they would finally learn the meaning of hopelessness. The footage showed the human fleet's arrival. Right on schedule, the quantum destabilizers activated. Space itself began to warp and twist. Then the humans did something unprecedented. Instead of trying to escape, they pushed deeper into the distortion field. Magnify Sector 7, Xin ordered. The display zoomed in on a human vessel as its hull began to buckle under impossible forces. But instead of surrendering to physics, the crew was adapting their shield geometry. They were using the spatial distortions to create new shield configurations that shouldn't have been possible. They turned our trap into an experiment, Analysis Director Vela noted, her crystalline form vibrating with disbelief. Look at their data transmissions. They're treating this as a learning opportunity. The recordings continued to play. As their ships were being torn apart by reality itself, the humans were documenting everything, sharing discoveries between vessels, improvising solutions that defied conventional physics. They'd reached the refugee colony not despite the quantum distortions, but by surfing them. This was meant to be their breaking point, Ixan said quietly. Instead, they broke physics. Sir, a junior analyst interrupted. You need to see the aftermath data. The display shifted to show what happened after the failed trap. The humans hadn't just rescued the refugees, they had adapted their newfound knowledge of quantum distortions to create stable transit corridors through the chaos. They were using the Dominion's weapon to revolutionize space travel. Preliminary analysis suggests they've reduced their long-range travel times by 40%. The analyst reported. They're already teaching other species how to navigate the distortion fields. Vela's crystals pulsed with realization. We didn't just fail to break them. We gave them a new tool. A new data stream appeared, intelligence from human space. Their scientists were excitedly discussing the breakthrough in quantum mechanics. Their engineers were already designing ships specifically to utilize the distortion fields. They were treating one of the deadliest weapons ever created as if it were a gift. How? Chen demanded. How do they keep doing this? Every trap, every challenge, every impossible situation, they turn it into an advantage. The answer came from an unexpected source. A human prisoner, captured during the early phases of the operation, had asked to address the Dominion leadership. Against traditional protocol, Sin agreed to hear them. Dr. Sarah Chen, quantum physicist and survivor of 3 previous impossible situations, stood before the Dominion Council with an amused expression that made Sin's crystals ache. You fundamentally misunderstand what breaking points are to humans, she explained. You see them as the moment where resistance becomes futile. We see them as the moment where we have to get creative. She gestured to the display still showing the quantum distortion data. Every time you try to break us, you give us a new puzzle to solve. And humans, we love puzzles, especially impossible ones. But the risk, Cain protested. The casualties, the sheer improbability of success. Risk? Chen laughed. Humans crossed oceans in wooden boats. We flew into space in metal cans powered by explosions. We built civilizations in places that should have killed us instantly. We did these things not because they were safe, but because they were necessary, or sometimes just because someone said we couldn't. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with an emotion Sin's translator couldn't quite parse. You want to know our real breaking point. It's watching others suffer when we could help. That's what drives us past normal limits. That's what makes us ignore possible and impossible. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Every attempt to break humanity's spirit had only made them stronger. Every trap had become a training ground. Every weapon had become a tool. There's an old saying on Earth, Chen added, almost gently. Pressure doesn't break diamonds, it creates them. Though I suppose, given your crystalline nature, you might appreciate that metaphor differently than we do. Xin studied the human scientist, finally understanding the true magnitude of the Dominion's miscalculation. They had tried to break a species that treated breaking points as transformation points, a species that responded to impossible challenges by rewriting the rules of what was possible. What do you suggest we do now? Chen asked, already knowing the answer would change everything. Chen smiled that terrible human smile that meant they knew something you didn't. Well, since you've already helped us revolutionize quantum physics, maybe we could discuss some other impossible problems you've given up on. I hear you have a few dying stars that need stabilizing. The Dominion Council watched in stunned silence as their prisoner began enthusiastically outlining solutions to problems they had classified as unsolvable centuries ago. They had tried to break humanity's spirit, only to discover that human spirit was the one force in the universe that refused to acknowledge limitations. The war processors would need significant reprogramming after this. The galaxy's fundamental constants, it seemed, were less constant than they had believed, especially when humans were involved. The emergency beacon pulsed weakly in the void between stars. The Meridian research vessel had been drifting for 3 standard cycles, its crew watching their life support slowly fail after an encounter with an unknown spatial anomaly. They had sent distress calls to every nearby civilization, but their location was too remote, the rescue too risky. First Officer Tilara monitored their dwindling resources with resigned acceptance. The Meridians were a logical species. They understood that sometimes survival calculations yielded negative results. Their own rescue ships had assessed the situation and determined the probability of success too low to attempt. Then the humans arrived. The vessel that dropped out of hyperspace wasn't the sleek rescue craft Tilara had expected. It was a patchwork of different technologies, its hull bearing marks of multiple repairs and modifications. The name painted on its side read, Second Chance. Meridian vessel, this is Captain Maya Rodriguez of the Second Chance. We picked up your distress call. Sorry it took us a while. Had to modify our engines to handle the anomaly's radiation signature. Tilara's antenna twitched in confusion. Captain, our own scientists determined this region was unsurvivable with current technology. How did you? Oh, we just jury-rigged a quantum shield array using parts from an old coffee maker and some modified sensor buoys, Rodriguez replied casually. Not elegant, but it works. Now, let's get your people out of there. What followed defied every protocol and safety regulation in Meridian space rescue doctrine. The human ship extended makeshift energy bridges, transferred power through improvised conduits, and at one point used their own life support as a backup for the failing Meridian systems. Your crew is taking unacceptable risks. Tilara protested as she watched humans in sealed suits physically weld patches onto their hull. The statistical likelihood off. Statistics are for after, Rodriguez interrupted. During a rescue, the only number that matters is how many people need help. The Meridian crew watched in fascination as the humans worked. They seemed to treat every problem as a personal challenge, celebrating each small victory with inexplicable enthusiasm. When one solution failed, they immediately tried 3 more. They're teaching us, Science Officer Carell realized, observing the humans demonstrate their improvised repair techniques. They're not just saving us. They're showing us how to save others. The revelation spread through the Meridian ship. Generations of logical, careful advancement had led them to view certain problems as unsolvable. The humans simply hadn't received that memo. News of the rescue spread quickly through galactic channels, but it wasn't just the success that caught attention. It was what happened afterward. The Meridians, historically one of the most conservative species in terms of technological innovation, began experimenting with hybrid technologies. They started taking calculated risks that would have been unthinkable before. The humans infected them with hope, noted a Saldaxi observer. It's spreading. Similar reports emerged across the galaxy. Species that had long accepted their limitations were suddenly challenging them. The Vorkath, who had never ventured beyond their solar system due to genetic sensitivity to FTL travel, were working with human engineers to develop new shielding techniques. The crystalline Extheri, previously unable to communicate with organic species, had enlisted human linguists to develop translation matrices. At a summit of galactic species, Ambassador Chen, now released from her previous captivity and serving as Earth's diplomatic representative, addressed the changes. You all thought we were reckless, she began. That our willingness to attempt the impossible was a sign of inferior evolution. But what you're beginning to understand is that impossible is just a word for something no one's been stubborn enough to solve yet. She gestured to the assembled representatives. each with their own stories of human-inspired transformations. We don't just ignore limitations, we help others ignore them too. Because every species has something unique to offer, some perspective that might be the key to solving an impossible problem. The Summit Hall's display showed footage from across the galaxy, humans and Meridians developing new navigation systems, human-inspired Vorkath ships making their first FTL jumps, Angst-theory crystals pulsing with translated poetry. But the real change, Chen continued, isn't in the technology or the innovations. It's in the philosophy. You're learning what humans have known since we first looked up at the stars. The universe isn't a set of boundaries to be accepted, but a series of challenges to be overcome. Together, T. Lyra, now serving as the Meridian ambassador, stood to address the summit. We once saw humans as an aberration, a species that refused to accept logical limits. We now understand that they were showing us how much we had limited ourselves. She activated a holographic display showing the modified Meridian rescue protocols, now incorporating human-inspired innovations. They taught us that helping others isn't about calculating success rates. It's about deciding that failure isn't an option. The second chance, its patchwork hull now bearing modifications from a dozen different species, had become a symbol of this new approach. Captain Rodriguez and her crew continued to answer distress calls across the galaxy, but now they rarely worked alone. Each rescue brought new allies, new innovations, new possibilities. You know what the really funny thing is? Rodriguez commented during one joint operation with a Meridian crew. We're not actually teaching you to be more like humans. We're teaching you to be more like yourselves, to stop letting fear of failure limit your potential. The galaxy was changing. Species that had evolved to be cautious were learning to take calculated risks. Civilizations that had developed in isolation were reaching out to share knowledge. And at the heart of it all was a simple human principle that had somehow become a universal truth. When someone needs help, you find a way. No matter what. The Grand Archive of Galactic Knowledge, once a testament to careful categorization of known facts, had undergone a remarkable transformation. Its crystalline walls now pulse with an ever-growing collection of impossible achievements, most tagged with the phrase, humanity-inspired. Archive keeper Zena, her bioluminescent patterns shifting with excitement, guided a group of young scholars through the newly established Human Innovation Wing. Her species had once dedicated themselves to preserving knowledge. Now they were learning to help create it. Before humanity joined the galactic community, she explained, we categorized civilization types by their technological advancement. Now we understand that the most important measure of advancement isn't technology, it's adaptability. The display around them showed scenes from the past decade. The restoration of dying stars using techniques developed by human alien engineering teams, the establishment of colonies in supposedly uninhabitable zones, the development of communication methods between previously incompatible species. But the humans didn't do these things alone. One student noted their crystalline form vibrating with curiosity. They worked with others. Exactly. Zena's patterns brightened. That's what we finally understood about humans. They're not just stubborn, they're contagious. Their refusal to accept limitations spreads to anyone who works with them long enough. The Archive's central chamber now housed what humans called the Wall of Why Not, a constantly updating display of projects once deemed impossible that were now in progress. Each entry included not just technical specifications, but stories of the people involved, the failures overcome, the moments when persistence prevailed over probability. A new alert pulsed through the Archive's network. Another impossible barrier had fallen. The Quantum Harmonics team, a collaboration between human engineers and crystalline entities, had finally achieved stable cross-dimensional communication. They had ignored 3 separate peer-reviewed papers proving it couldn't be done. You know what the humans say about those papers now? Zena asked her students. They say the math wasn't wrong. It just wasn't imaginative enough. The students buzzed with amusement. It was such a human way of looking at things. But then, they all thought a bit more like humans these days. A familiar figure entered the chamber. Dr. Sarah Chen, now sporting gray hair, but the same irrepressible spark in her eyes. The former prisoner-turned-diplomatic advisor had become a regular contributor to the Archive's new understanding of human nature. "Still trying to explain us to the galaxy?" she asked Zena with a smile. "Still trying to understand how you changed everything," Zena replied. "Your species didn't just ignore impossible barriers. You made everyone else start ignoring them too." Chen laughed. "We didn't change anyone. We just reminded them of something they'd forgotten. The universe doesn't care what you think is impossible. It only cares what you're willing to try." The display shifted to show the latest statistical analysis of galactic development. The trends were unmistakable. Species that had once prided themselves on careful, methodical progress were now taking bold risks. Civilizations that had evolved to avoid danger were learning to face it. The careful balance of the galaxy had given way to something far more dynamic. "The really interesting thing," Chen noted, watching the data streams, "is how each species approaches impossible problems differently now. The Meridians bring their logic to our chaos. The crystalline entities show us patterns we'd never see. The energy beings think in dimensions we couldn't imagine. But we all share one human trait: never giving up." One of the students ventured. "Never giving up alone," Chen corrected. "Humans aren't special because we're stubborn. We're special because we're stubborn on behalf of others." And somehow, that turned out to be the most contagious thing in the galaxy. Zena's patterns shifted to show agreement. The archive had documented countless examples. Species that would never take risks for themselves would move mountains to help others. The human approach to impossible problems had become a galactic approach. Face them together, fail together, try again together, succeed together. The latest addition to the archive told the story perfectly. A human-designed ship had encountered a space-time anomaly that should have destroyed it. Instead of retreating, the crew had reached out to every nearby species for ideas. The solution they eventually found combined human determination, meridian logic, crystalline energy patterns, and 3 other technologies that supposedly couldn't work together. "That's the real legacy of humanity in the galaxy," Zena told her students as they prepared to leave. "Not that they taught us to ignore impossible things, but that they taught us to ignore them together. They showed us that the strongest force in the universe isn't technology or evolution or even determination. It's the moment when one being looks at another and says, 'I'll help you try.'" As if to prove her point, the archive's alert system chimed again. Somewhere in the galaxy, another impossible problem was being challenged. Another barrier was about to fall. Another group of diverse species was about to discover that impossible was just a word that hadn't met the right combination of determination and cooperation yet. And in ships and stations, and colonies across the galaxy, beings of all kinds were asking the same question that had become humanity's gift to the cosmos: why not? The answer, more and more often, was no reason at all. Let's try it together.